Just like the reading process, there are 3 stages of the writing process: pre-writing, writing, and post-writing. Pre-writing is anything you do to help you generate ideas before you actually put your pen to paper or hand to a keyboard. There's different types of pre-writing. Many of them you have probably used before: listing, diagramming, group discussion, brainstorming together out loud, speaking, listing, clustering. At this stage of your education, most of you will probably start pre-writing by simply power writing, which is just when you don't worry about any structure or format or spelling or vocabulary. You just brainstorm your thoughts down in sentences. You also may spend time speaking with somebody and talking with somebody. Sometimes you may sketch. I'm a list maker myself. I like to make a list of things I want to include, and then I can kind of draw arrows and switch them around. I also really like doing it with a pencil and paper. I don't use a computer too much for getting my thoughts out. I will draft, of course, that way, but when I'm pre-writing, I tend to just use the old-fashioned method. A good strategy for starting your power writing or free writing is to turn the monitor off. If you turn your monitor off and just put your hands on the keyboard and type away, the silly little errors and distractions by wanting to make your paper seem perfect, quotes, aren't there. So you can just brainstorm and get those thoughts out by not looking at the actual typed word. So we're going to go through these stages together. What we're going to do, what we're going to write, is we're going to try to recall our very earliest writing memory. The first time we remember actually writing something. It could be a song, it could be a paper for a class, it could be a diary, it could be notes passed in class. Just think back as far as you can. And if you can't think that far back, then maybe just think about a few years ago or the first one you recall. So just because it's your earliest memory doesn't necessarily mean you were young. My earliest memory, I was young. I was in 2nd grade, maybe even 1st grade, and the teacher told us that we need to write about what we wanted to be when we grew up. Well, in 2nd grade, I was 7, and I had no idea what I wanted to be when I grew up. So because I did not know what I wanted to be when I grew up, I thought I couldn't write. So I learned quickly that I was going to fake it. I was going to just write about how I wanted to be a hairdresser when I grew up, and I did not want to be a hairdresser when I grew up. My hair was long and mangy, and I could care less when I was 7 years old what my hair looked like. But I had just been, I guess, with my mom, and I saw how the hairdresser just looked so pretty, and she talked up a storm and carried on conversations. So I said, well, that's what I'll do. I'll just make that up and write about how that's what I'm going to be. I look back on that and think, that's just terrible. You know, I thought I couldn't write because I didn't know the answer to the prompt. And I thought there had to be one answer to the prompt. So I hope throughout this class that you realize that I'm giving you many choices, and that writing is expression. There is no correct answer. It's not like math. You know, 2 + 2 is 4, and there's nothing else it will ever be. But writing is different. Writing is an art form. Okay, so now we're going to take that pre-writing that you just did. The pre-writing are your ideas about your earliest memory, and perhaps you made a list, perhaps you clustered, maybe you power wrote, maybe you just scribbled some sentences down. We're going to take that and we're going to draft about that episode. So, of course, I can't see the pre-writing right now, but I'm going to assume you did that. We're going to go on to the wiki and start drafting about your early writing memory. So what you're going to do is you're going to go back to Blackboard. On the left-hand side, there is a tab called Tools. You're going to go into the Tools section, click on Tools. Once you're in Tools, you're going to find the Wiki, W-I-K-I, and you're going to click on the Wiki section. Once you're in the Wiki section, you will see a wiki that says Earliest Writing Memory. click on that. Once you're inside that wiki page, you are going to, or that inside that wiki, you are going to create a page. So when you create a page, you're going to put your name as the title. And then I just want you to draft. Do not worry about spelling. Do not worry about proper grammar. Just start drafting about your earliest writing memory. Just sit down and maybe spend 15 minutes, maybe 2 paragraphs, 3 paragraphs, and then save that. Do not correct it. Save that, and I will take a look at those. And then we are going to go on to the next section, the next slide, which is revising. So you can stop this now, go into the wiki, and directions will be under week 2 also if you missed them as I just went over them. And we're going to just start drafting about that earliest writing memory. And then after you finish that, then come back on to this presentation and we'll start talking about revising. The next step after you draft is revising. So right now you should have your earliest writing memory inside the early writing experience wiki, and then you've made a page with your name and you drafted and you hit submit. So now once the page is out there, once your communication has been put on the wiki, we need to revise it. And revising is changing the way something sounds. So one thing we want to look at is organization. How are we going to organize this paper? Do we want to talk about something general, like lessons learned in life, or memories, and then move to the specific one? Or do you want to talk specific, and then maybe general to the large meaning of, in the world, or in your life, or in lessons? Do we want to talk about something that happened chronologically? You know, first we did this, and then she assigned me this, and then I got nervous because I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up, and so forth. Spatial, are we going to talk about where things lay spatially? If I was perhaps describing my backyard, I might start talking about the area by the garden first, then move over to the patio. That's spatial sense, or where things are located. Are we going to talk about least important things to important things? Or maybe most important to least important. One thing we want to look at is how the paper starts and how the paper ends. So a lead is something that we use to draw the reader into our paper at the very beginning. Sometimes we want to describe something very vividly. We might use an anecdote, or which is a little story or a little tale. We might use something just crazy to draw that reader in, something that the reader would never expect. Or perhaps we're going to compare our story to something else. Maybe we're going to be real dramatic. Or maybe we're going to have an exciting quote that makes the reader want to read my paper. The other thing we want to focus on is how we end the paper. We want to have a conclusion that where the reader feels very satisfied. They don't feel like they're missing something. There's different ways to conclude any type of writing. One is summarizing what you've just said, and that is my least favorite. I think when you summarize what was said, you insult the reader. You already told me once, I don't need to hear it again. However, you may want to highlight some of the key points, which is almost like summarizing, just not as detailed. You might have the reader ponder your message by giving them a hypothetical question. You might talk about what would it be like in the future if we had not done this, or if this had not occurred. Maybe it's a problem you're going to have a solution for. Or maybe you're going to want to try to make the reader want to do something. Call them to action. And call them to action doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to physically act. Perhaps it's just a different way of thinking, or giving that reader some insight. Something that is often overlooked that is so important is the title. The title is the first information that the reader gets, the first bit of communication. It's going to hint to the reader what the paper is about. It's going to hook the reader into continuing to want to read. It can't be too long. It should not be a full sentence. Sometimes they work, but usually not. You should not put punctuation on titles, no quotes, no underlining. All the words in a title start with a capital letter. However, the first and last ones always do. However, the middle ones will not start with a capital if they're articles, conjunctions, or prepositions. For example, the is an article, an, Conjunctions are like and, or, but, so, and prepositions are words that show relationships between things like under, or around, or before, of. So those little words don't get capitalized. These are some little tidbits on what to do for your title. But titles are a big deal. Some other things we're going to look for when we revise are repeated words. How many times have you said the word writing? If it's too many times, you need to change the way the sentence is structured or change the word form. If we have she, or great, 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 look for those words that are overused. We also want to take out real simple words that are vague, that you can't really visualize. Very, went. You know, I went to the store. Well, that doesn't tell me anything. How did you go? I drove to the store. I ran to the store. I sprinted to the store. Sad does not tell me anything. I had tears rolling down my face. That tells me something. Happy. Happy doesn't say much. Great. So, those are overused, simple words. We don't need them. Check your sentence structure. They should be various lengths. Something that I like to do in the class when I have a face-to-face class is I like for the students to go through and circle or highlight the first word of every sentence. If you want to take the time to do that on that wiki, it's very interesting. It'll let you see how long your sentences really are visually. So if you have a lot of highlighting marks, then perhaps your sentences are too short. If you have very, very few highlighting marks, perhaps there's too many run-ons or they're just too long. The other thing we want to revise for is transition words. We want to take each thought and transition it into the next. The LB Brief has a great section on transition words, a little cheat sheet for you. You can look it up in the index and find the page they're on. So now I want you to get back on the wiki and I want you to make some revisions. So I can see the difference between the first and the second, I want you to take the first writing that you did. You're going to go in and hit edit your wiki page, and then take the first part you wrote, copy it, highlight the whole thing, copy it, then paste it underneath, and then go through and make some changes. Remember, we're just looking at how it sounds. We don't need to worry about spelling because you can't hear spelling. We don't need to worry about capitalization. We don't need to worry about periods or commas. Oh, the dreaded commas. All we're worrying about right now is how it sounds. So you're going to go back on the wiki. You're going to highlight what you wrote, copy it, right-click copy, paste it underneath, and then make some changes. And then I'll be able to see the differences between the two. The next stage of the writing process is editing. Editing is changing how a paper looks. So while revising worries about the sentence structure and the sound and your word choice, editing is all the little details. Editing has to do with the commas, the spelling, the structure of the paper. My biggest plea to you is to use that LB Brief. The LB Brief has every rule you'd ever want to know about grammar and writing. My big rule is never put a comma in the paper unless you know why the comma goes there. I would much rather see a paper that has too few commas than one that is comma crazy. And I'm sure you all remember your middle school selves being comma crazy. So let's try to move away from that. The final stage of the writing process is publishing. And we are going to publish according to MLA standards. And we are not going to worry about that right now. We'll worry about that more when we do our first paper. But MLA is also listed in the LB Brief.